The desert sun had just begun to rise over the wide, open land when Daniel Calder started his journey through the canyon. Daniel had traveled these lands for many years, long enough to recognize every curve of the valley, every whisper of the dry wind, and every change in the sky. He was a quiet man, not by nature but by experience. Silence was a companion in the desert, and he had learned long ago to listen more than he spoke. The desert was not empty to him. It held stories. It held memories. It held the shape of life in its own quiet way. On this particular day, the air felt heavier than usual. It was midsummer, and the heat settled early. The sand under his boots was already warm, and the distant cliffs shimmered like they were covered in thin water. Daniel moved carefully, one step at a time, not out of fear but because he had learned patience from the land itself. He carried a small pack of water, a blanket, a few dried rations, and a calm sense of purpose. There was no rush. The desert did not reward rushing. As he walked, he listened. The desert had its own soft language, the sound of wind passing through rock crevices, the calls of distant birds looking for shade, the quiet scurry of small creatures hiding from the sun. Daniel listened to these things the way others might listen to music. They gave him direction. They told him life was always moving, even when it appeared still. The canyon path narrowed as he reached a series of stones shaped by years of weather. He stepped over the rocks with practiced ease, but something unusual caught his attention. The air was still, too still. The birds were quiet. Even the wind paused. Daniel stopped walking. There was a feeling that something nearby needed help. He did not know exactly how he knew. He only knew that he had felt this sensation before, and it had always led him to someone or something in need. He continued forward with care. The sun shone brightly, reflecting off pale stone. Then at the base of a small cluster of boulders near a dried creek bed, he saw something that made him pause. At first it looked like part of the landscape, just a shape lying still in the sand. But Daniel's eyes were trained, and he noticed the shape was not stone. It was a person. He approached slowly, not out of caution but out of respect. The closer he came, the more he could see. It was a woman, lying on her side, her hands resting weakly near her chest. Her dark hair was tangled and dry, her clothing worn by wind and travel. Daniel could see she had been without water for a long time. The desert was harsh but never cruel on purpose. It simply required strength, and sometimes strength ran out. Daniel knelt beside her and listened for breath. A soft, slow breath came. She was alive, but barely. Her lips were dry, her skin warm with heat. Daniel did not speak right away. Speaking would not help her now. Instead, he carefully took hold of his water flask, lifted her head gently, and let a few drops of water touch her lips. She swallowed with effort, but it was a good sign. He waited a moment and gave her a little more, just enough to help but not overwhelm. The woman did not open her eyes, but her breathing steadied slightly. Daniel knew she needed shelter. The desert sun was growing stronger by the minute. If he left her there, she would not survive. He looked around and knew there was a small cave not far from the creek bed. He had used it once during a sandstorm. It was shaded and cool enough to help her recover. He wrapped his blanket around her shoulders to protect her from the heat. Then, with a careful and steady movement, he lifted her. Daniel was strong, but he did not hurry. The desert did not allow hurried movements. Slow and steady, he walked toward the cave. The sun glowed brighter overhead, yet inside the cave the air was cool and shadowed. He laid her down gently on the smooth stone floor and checked her breathing again. She was still with him. He took time to make the place comfortable. He placed his blanket beneath her head, arranged stones to support her back, and collected some dried branches outside for a small fire when the air cooled later in the evening. He was mindful to keep the cave quiet and peaceful. The woman needed calm more than anything. Hours passed slowly, and Daniel continued to give her small portions of water at careful intervals. Her breathing strengthened bit by bit. Sometime near sunset, she opened her eyes. They were deep and attentive, though filled with tiredness. She looked around as though trying to remember where she was. Daniel sat nearby, not too close, and gave a small nod of reassurance. "You are safe," he said in a calm voice. He did not ask her questions. He did not expect her to speak. She blinked and looked at him with eyes that held both caution and curiosity. She did not yet have the strength to rise or speak. So Daniel simply stayed present. Words were not always needed to show care. Night came gently over the desert. The cave was quiet except for the distant sound of wind brushing the outer walls. Daniel lit a small fire to offer warmth, though the flames were soft and small. The woman slept again, her breathing now steadier, her body slowly recovering. In the morning she tried to speak. Her voice was soft, just above a whisper, and her words came in her native language. Daniel did not understand the sentence, but he understood the tone. It was a tone of gratitude, hesitant but real. He nodded and offered her a bit of warm broth he had made. She took it slowly. She did not eat much, but every little bit helped her grow stronger. Over the next few days, they settled into a pattern. Daniel gathered firewood, fetched water from a nearby hidden spring, and made simple meals. The woman rested, conserving her energy. Sometimes she sat up to watch him work, her expression thoughtful. Other times she slept, letting her body recover. And Daniel remained patient, never pushing her to talk, never asking what had brought her to that desperate state. He understood that some things revealed themselves in their own time. Gradually, she began to speak a few words in English. They were simple words: thank you, water, yes, no. One morning, when the sun was just beginning to soften the sky with gentle pink light, she told him her name. Nalin. Daniel repeated the name quietly, honoring it. Names matter. They tell part of who a person is. Nalin watched him as he said her name, and for the first time since he found her, she offered a faint, gentle smile. It was small, but it held something true. In return, he told her his name, simply and without explanation. Daniel. There were still many things unsaid between them, questions about where she came from, what happened to her, and what her future might be. But those questions could wait. For now, the most important truth was that two lives had crossed in a quiet canyon, in a place where the desert tested every living thing. Daniel had found Nalin at the edge of her strength, and he had given her the time and space to return to herself. Their connection did not need to be defined. It only needed to be respected. The desert had brought them together in a moment of quiet need, and it allowed something gentle to grow in the calm silence that followed. And so the days continued, slow and steady, filled with the soft sound of wind, the glow of morning light, and the unspoken understanding between two souls who had found one another in the most unexpected place. The days passed slowly, warmed by the gentle sun and cooled by the calm of night. The cave had become a temporary home for Daniel and Nalin. Although they had come together under difficult circumstances, there was a quiet peace in the place where they stayed. With each sunrise, Nalin grew a little stronger, and Daniel continued to care for her with calm patience. Nalin began sitting outside the cave in the early mornings, where the air was cool and the world felt new. She would sit wrapped in Daniel's blanket, facing the open land. The canyon stretched far into the distance, filled with soft reds and golds that changed with the light. The desert had its own music, gentle and slow. Nalin listened to it the way one listens to a story. Daniel never tried to hurry her recovery. He understood that healing was not only about the body. Sometimes the heart needed time too, so he made sure the days were calm and without worry. He spoke softly and only when needed. He did not rush her to walk far or stand long. Instead, he offered help in small ways, handing her water, bringing food, setting smooth stones for her to rest her feet on. Each gesture was simple but full of quiet care. As her strength returned, Nalin began to help Daniel with small tasks. One morning, she took it upon herself to tidy the area around the cave, clearing scattered twigs and organizing the items Daniel had placed nearby. She folded the blanket after waking and arranged Daniel's tools in a neat line. She did not say why she did it. She simply had a nature that expressed gratitude through action. Daniel noticed everything, but he did not thank her in words. Instead, he nodded and shared an extra portion of breakfast that morning. Nalin understood the gesture just as clearly as if he had spoken. Their communication was made of small, quiet exchanges that did not require explanation. They shared their meals near the cave entrance, where they could watch the sky shift colors as the day passed. Daniel would sometimes tell her about the places he had traveled, the rivers he crossed, the mountains he climbed, the long journeys beneath open skies. He never spoke with pride or to impress her. He simply described the world the way someone might describe a memory of home, easy, gentle, meaningful. Nalin listened closely. She enjoyed the tone of his voice, even when she did not understand every word. It made her feel safe. Safe was not a feeling she had known for some time. She spoke as well, slowly at first, choosing English words carefully. She would describe shapes in the clouds, the sound of wind, or how the night sky reminded her of stories she once knew. She did not share everything because some memories still rested too heavily in her heart. Daniel did not press her. He simply listened with quiet respect, and she saw the sincerity in his eyes. One evening, the two of them sat beside a small fire Daniel had made. The flames flickered gently, giving a warm glow to the cave walls. The air outside was cool but not cold, and the sky above was full of stars. The desert was peaceful at night, almost like it was breathing slowly. Daniel looked toward the sky and pointed out a group of stars. "That one," he said softly, "is a guide star. Travelers use it to find their way when the land seems endless." Nalin followed the direction of his hand. She watched the soft, steady glow of the star and allowed herself to breathe a little deeper. She understood the feeling of being lost in a wide world, and she understood what it meant to find direction where none seemed possible. Their days took on a rhythm. In the early morning, Daniel would gather water and wood. Nalin would prepare the space they shared, smoothing the blanket, shaping stones into neat borders around the fire pit. In the afternoon, they would sit and talk or simply watch the world together. In the evening, they shared the warmth of the fire and the quiet comfort of each other's presence. One day, as Daniel was preparing to fetch water, Nalin stood up and motioned that she wanted to come along. Daniel looked at her carefully, noting whether she was strong enough. She gave him a small, steady nod. So they walked together along a gentle path. The spring where Daniel gathered water was a hidden place, tucked between stones and shaded by a few desert shrubs. The water there was cool and clear, a rare gift in such an environment. When they reached the spring, Nalin leaned down and touched the water with her fingers. She smiled softly. It reminded her of something she had known once, perhaps a memory of home, or perhaps just the feeling of being part of the natural world again. She helped Daniel fill the water containers and carried one of them herself. It was heavier than she expected, but she did not complain. She simply walked slowly and steadily. Daniel saw the determination in her steps and did not take the container away. He knew she wanted to stand on her own again. As the days continued, the quiet trust between them deepened. Neither of them spoke of the future. There was no promise or expectation. They simply lived each day as it came. Sometimes silence filled the space between them, but it was not an empty silence. It was warm and shared, like two familiar chairs placed side by side beneath the shade of a tree. There were moments when Daniel would look over and see Nalin watching the horizon with a thoughtful expression. He knew she had memories she was not yet ready to speak of. He respected that. Everyone carries a past, and some parts of it require time before they can be touched. He did not try to take her sorrow away. He simply created a space where it did not have to be too heavy. One afternoon, a gentle wind passed through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of distant wildflowers. The sky was wide and clear, and the air felt lighter. Nalin stood outside the cave, her hair moving softly with the breeze. Daniel was sitting nearby, sharpening one of his simple tools. Nalin turned toward him and spoke in a voice that was clear and sure. "You helped me live," she said. Daniel stopped sharpening and looked at her. He did not answer right away, because he knew the importance of the moment. He saw in her eyes that she was not just speaking about the water or the shelter. She was speaking about something deeper, the quiet kindness, the steady presence, the patient silence that had given her room to breathe again. "You are strong," Daniel replied softly. "You walked back to life. I only helped you find the path." Nalin held his gaze for a moment longer. Her eyes shone with something calm, something grateful, something real. She did not smile fully, but there was a gentleness in her expression that said more than words could. The wind moved again, carrying with it a sense of stillness. The canyon seemed to settle into a quiet embrace around them. They did not need to speak further. The understanding between them was clear. Even without promises, even without explanations, a quiet bond had formed. It was built not from grand gestures, but from everyday moments. The sharing of water, the warmth of a small fire, the stillness of watching the morning sky together. It was a bond of presence, patience, and gentle respect. And though neither of them knew what the days ahead would bring, they both understood something important. Sometimes, two lives meet in a quiet place, not to change the world, but to hold it steady for a little while. Days continued to pass in the quiet calm of the canyon, and Nalin's strength grew little by little. She walked farther in the mornings and helped Daniel prepare the fire in the evenings. Her steps were steady now, and she moved with a grace that had only been dimmed, never lost. Daniel noticed the careful way she listened to the land, to the wind, to the small signs that others might miss. It reminded him that she had once lived very close to nature, just as he did now. One morning, after the sun rose soft and golden across the sandstone cliffs, Daniel began packing his travel items. It was time to return to the small settlement he lived near. Supplies were running low, and he had responsibilities there. He looked over at Nalin, sitting near the cave entrance, her hands resting lightly on her knees. She was strong enough to make the journey now, and he assumed she would return to her own people soon. He did not want to speak the words, but he felt he should, so after a quiet moment he said softly, "You are well enough now to travel. If you wish to return to your people, I can help you find the path." Nalin did not answer right away. She looked out across the wide land with a thoughtful expression. The silence between them was gentle, not heavy. Finally, she turned her eyes toward Daniel, calm and steady. She shook her head. "I stay," she said simply. The words were small, but they carried meaning. She did not explain herself, and Daniel did not ask why. He simply accepted her decision. He gave a slight nod, acknowledging her choice, and continued packing. There was no need for discussion. Sometimes the heart speaks in ways that do not require reasons. When they began the journey toward the settlement, they walked side by side. The path wound through dry riverbeds and open spaces dotted with desert shrubs. Nalin walked with her head held high, her steps sure and balanced. Daniel matched her pace, never walking ahead, never behind. They moved together easily, as though they had traveled together for years instead of days. The settlement came into view near midday. It was not large, just a handful of homes built from wood and stone, standing quietly under the wide sky. Smoke rose gently from one chimney, and a few animals grazed in fenced fields nearby. The place was simple and calm, with the sound of distant voices carrying lightly across the warm air. As they approached, a few people paused in their work and watched them come. Daniel was known in the settlement. He had been living and working there for many seasons. People trusted his judgment and respected his independence. But Nalin was new to them. They observed her with curious eyes, not unkind but unsure. Daniel greeted them with his usual steady warmth. He did not offer long explanations. He simply said, "This is Nalin, she will stay for a while." The words were enough. The people understood that if Daniel brought her, she was someone to be treated with respect. Nalin stayed close to Daniel as they entered the settlement. The world here was different from the quiet canyon. There were sounds of conversation, movement, the soft clatter of tools. But the people here were not loud or hurried. It was a gentle place, shaped more by open sky than by walls. Daniel showed her his small home on the edge of the settlement, near a grove of shade trees. The house was simple but carefully kept. There was a small garden outside with herbs and a few flowering plants. Nalin stepped close to the flowers, touching one of the petals with gentle fingers. She smiled softly. She liked the garden immediately. Daniel set out a place for her to rest inside. He did not assume she would share his space permanently, but he made it clear she was welcome. She touched the blanket he laid out and nodded in understanding. No words were needed. In the days that followed, Nalin adjusted to the rhythm of the settlement. She learned the pathways between the houses, the voices of the people, and the tasks that filled the days. Daniel worked repairing tools and tending to the animals that belonged to the community. He spoke quietly to those who needed help, always offering guidance with patience. Nalin found ways to help too. She gathered wild herbs that grew outside the settlement. She knew which plants were soothing, which could flavor meals gently, which would keep away insects when dried and burned in small amounts. The other women noticed her skill and approached her slowly, with curiosity rather than fear. One afternoon, a woman named Eliza brought her a basket of berries and smiled kindly. Nalin accepted it with both hands and bowed her head slightly in gratitude. From that moment on, the settlement began to feel less like a place Nalin was visiting and more like a place she could belong to, even if only for a time. Daniel and Nalin continued to share quieter moments in the evenings. They would sit outside under the trees, watching the sky shift into colors of dusk. Sometimes Daniel would tell stories of the road, of quiet mountain lakes or hidden valleys he had once passed through. Nalin listened and asked questions when she felt comfortable. Sometimes she shared small pieces of her own memories, not the painful ones, but the ones filled with gentle light. Stories of sitting by a stream, or of laughter shared during early morning gatherings. Their bond was not spoken about directly. They did not name it or define it. It was something that lived in the space between their shared silences, in the easy way they moved near each other, in the careful attention they gave to one another's comfort. It was a bond built without urgency, without expectation. It simply existed, natural and quiet. There were moments when Daniel felt something in his heart open in ways he had not expected. He found himself watching the way Nalan's face softened when she listened to the wind, the quiet grace in her hands, the steady patience in her expression. He did not speak of these feelings. He did not want to place weight where there should be freedom. Nalan, too, felt a sense of peace near Daniel. He was gentle without needing to prove strength. He was present without asking for anything in return. She did not know what the future would hold, but for now the quiet companionship was enough. Though some in the settlement were slow to understand their closeness, no one questioned it openly. Daniel's quiet, respectful nature made it clear that his choices were thoughtful. And Nalan's calm presence made it clear that she carried dignity in every movement. Days flowed into weeks. The warmth of summer softened. The evenings grew cooler. The bond between Daniel and Nalan remained steady, unforced and full of something kind and unspoken. No promises were made. No declarations were needed. Sometimes two souls do not need to rush toward understanding. Sometimes the heart speaks simply by staying. The settlement moved through its days with quiet regularity, and Nalan became a familiar presence among the people who lived there. She worked beside the women in the gardens, helped gather herbs for healing, and sometimes sat with the children to show them how to shape tiny figures out of clay and dried grass. The children liked her calm way of speaking and the soft rhythm in her voice. When she smiled, it was not a large smile, but it felt full and true. Slowly, the settlement began to feel balanced with her there, as though the place had simply been waiting for her presence. Daniel continued his daily work as well, repairing small tools, tending to animals, and helping in the fields. In the evenings, he and Nalan would share quiet conversations or simply watch the horizon fade into the soft colors of dusk. Their bond had settled into something steady, something gentle and warm. They did not speak about the meaning of it or what it might become. They simply lived beside each other in a way that felt natural, like two rivers flowing side by side. One afternoon, the sun hung high in the sky, and a soft breeze moved across the settlement. Nalan was weaving a small basket from desert grasses, and Daniel was fixing a wooden fence near the edge of the fields. The day was peaceful, filled with the sound of birds calling and the faint laughter of children nearby. Then, something changed in the air, not loud or sudden, just a shift. The kind of change that someone who listens closely to the land can feel. Nalan paused, her hands stilling on the basket. Daniel noticed her posture shift, her gaze turning toward the distant ridge beyond the settlement. In the distance, several figures were approaching. They traveled on foot, moving with a quiet sense of purpose, their steps steady and even. They were too far away to recognize at first, but Nalan's breath caught slightly and she lowered her eyes. Daniel watched her carefully. He did not speak. He knew this moment was not about him, but about something long carried within her. As the figures came closer, it became clear who they were. They were members of Nalan's own people. They walked together with calm dignity, their expressions thoughtful, not urgent or hurried. They had come with no anger and no tension. They simply came because they had been searching for one of their own. The settlement grew quiet as the group approached. People stepped aside respectfully, allowing space. Daniel remained still, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He did not step forward or back. He simply stood nearby, present but not interfering. The group stopped a few steps away from where Nalan stood. They greeted her in her own language. Their voices were gentle, filled with recognition. One of them, an elder with hair touched by many seasons, spoke softly. Nalan listened, her eyes focused on the ground for a long moment before she lifted her gaze. Daniel could not understand the words being spoken, but he could understand the feeling in the air. It was not a moment of pressure or demand. It was a moment of welcome, of invitation, of return. The conversation between Nalan and her people continued quietly. She spoke more now than she had spoken in many days, her voice steady but filled with something deep and tender. She told them where she had been, how she had survived, and how she had found a safe place to rest. When the conversation ended, Nalin turned toward Daniel. Her expression held a softness that reached far inside. She walked to him slowly and stood before him, searching his face as though choosing her words with care. It took time for her to speak. When she did, her voice was quiet but clear enough to be understood. "I stay because I needed to breathe," she said. Daniel listened, his gaze steady and patient. "For a long time," she continued, "my heart had no rest. The world felt heavy. I could not find my place in it. When you found me, I did not know if I wished to continue living. But your kindness gave me a quiet place to stand. It helped me remember that the world can still be gentle." Daniel felt the truth of her words settle around them like evening light. He did not speak. He simply let her continue. "I stayed because this place was safe for my spirit, not because I was ready to begin a new path," she said. Her eyes lowered for a moment, then lifted again, meeting his with honesty. "The ones I loved are no longer here. My heart has been resting, not rebuilding, not moving forward. Only resting." Her voice did not break. It did not tremble. It simply carried the weight of truth, spoken with quiet grace. Daniel understood. Not the details, not the depth of memories she still held silently, but the feeling of loving someone deeply, losing them and having the heart sit very still afterward, unsure of how to step forward again. He nodded slowly, his voice soft with acceptance. "You do not need to explain more." Nalin exhaled gently, relieved that she did not need to offer more than honesty. The elder from her people stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. He looked at Daniel with thoughtful eyes, offering a small nod, not of gratitude only, but of acknowledgement. A quiet understanding passed between them, one that did not require shared language. Nalin turned back to Daniel. "I must go," she said softly, "not because I want to leave your kindness, but because my heart needs to return to where it began, so it can learn how to move again." Her words were not a goodbye born from rejection. They were a goodbye born from healing. A gentle one. A necessary one. Daniel nodded again. His heart did not feel light, but it also did not feel heavy in a painful way. It felt full of something he could not name, something like respect, something like love that does not need possession to be real. He did not ask her to stay. He did not hold her hand or make a plea. He simply gave her the freedom that had always been part of their connection. Freedom was the quiet thread that had made their bond gentle and true. Nalin placed her hand over her heart, then touched her fingers lightly to his shoulder. It was a gesture of gratitude, of recognition, of farewell that was not final but complete. She stepped back and joined her people. They began to walk, their steps calm and unhurried. Nalin did not look back quickly. She took her steps steadily. Only once, when she reached the edge of the settlement, did she turn her head slightly and meet Daniel's eyes across the distance. The look was peaceful, grateful, and whole. Daniel stood still long after they disappeared from view. The wind moved softly around him, carrying the warmth of the day into a gentle evening. He breathed deeply and closed his eyes for a moment. He had given safety. She had given meaning. Sometimes caring for someone does not end with holding them close. Sometimes it ends with letting them walk forward with strength. After Nalin left with her people, the settlement became quiet in a different way. It was not an empty quiet or a lonely one. It was the kind of quiet that follows a meaningful chapter, the kind that lets memories settle gently instead of fading. Daniel stood for a long while after she disappeared into the distance. He did not chase her steps with his mind. He simply allowed the moment to exist, like watching the sun set without needing to hold on to the light. The wind moved softly through the grass. The sky stretched wide and gentle overhead, and Daniel breathed calmly, feeling the weight in his chest shift into something that did not hurt. It rested there like a soft stone, solid, real, but not crushing. He returned to his small home slowly. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt a little different. The blanket she had folded still lay neatly near the woven basket she had finished. Her touch remained in the smoothness of the clay bowl she had cleaned, in the orderly placement of tools near the door. She was gone, but the kindness she brought remained quietly, like the last warmth of sunlight after evening. Daniel sat near the hearth inside his home and let the memories come naturally. He remembered the day he found her, her quiet strength, her steady eyes, the gentle way she moved when she had no energy to spare. He remembered the peace of the canyon, the silent companionship, the shared stillness. He remembered the mornings where they sat watching dawn appear slowly, without the need for words. None of these memories brought pain. They brought gratitude. Gratitude for having shared time with someone whose presence felt sincere. Gratitude that he could help another soul breathe again when the world had grown too heavy. His heart did not feel broken. It felt shaped. Shaped by care, shaped by understanding, shaped by something that grew quietly and left gracefully. Life in the settlement continued. There were fences to mend, crops to check, tools to repair. Daniel returned to his daily work with steady hands. He did not withdraw into silence or solitude. He simply lived with a slower awareness, a deeper softness in the way he looked at the world. The people in the settlement noticed. They saw that he carried something meaningful inside him, although none of them asked what it was. They respected him too much to ask. Sometimes the children came to visit him while he worked. They would ask him to show them how to tie knots or fix simple tools. Daniel smiled more often now. The smiles were quiet, but they came easily. When the children asked where Nalin had gone, Daniel answered gently. "She has gone home to continue her journey," he would say. The children accepted the answer. They did not ask more. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky in orange and rose-colored light, Daniel often walked to the edge of the settlement. He would sit on a flat stone beneath a tall tree and look toward the horizon, not in longing, not in sadness, just in remembrance. And during those moments he felt connected to something larger than himself, something that existed beyond time and distance. He knew Nalin was walking her own path somewhere far from him. He did not know where the path led. He did not expect news of her or messages. She had needed rest and she found it. Now she needed to return to the place where her heart could learn to move again. That was the way life worked. People came into each other's lives for reasons that could not always be defined by time or permanence. Some evenings, Daniel took out the small carved pendant Nalin had given him before leaving. It was shaped like a leaf, smooth and simple, made from polished wood. He held it carefully, feeling the calm in its surface. The pendant was not a bond meant to hold someone close. It was a symbol of gratitude, a reminder of a season shared between two souls who met in a moment of need. He did not wear it around his neck. Instead, he kept it in a small wooden box beside his bed. Sometimes he would open the box at night and look at the pendant resting inside. It made him feel at peace, like the quiet of the canyon had followed him home and settled into his life in a gentle way. Seasons passed. The summer heat softened into the cooler breath of autumn. Leaves changed their colors. The field shifted from green to warm gold, and morning air carried the scent of change. Life flowed forward as it always does. Daniel continued to help where he was needed. He shared stories with new travelers who came through the settlement. He listened to the concerns of neighbors and encouraged them with calm, thoughtful words. He became, without meaning to, a person people felt safe around. He had always been steady, but something about him now felt even more grounded, as though he had learned the art of being present in a deeper way. Sometimes at night, he would dream of the canyon, the soft curve of the red stone walls, the cool shade of the hidden cave, the quiet companionship shared there. In the dreams, he and Nalin did not speak. They simply existed beside each other, breathing in the same calm space. When he woke, the dream did not leave him with ache. It left him with a sense of gentle warmth. Time continued moving, and Daniel continued living. He did not wait for Nalin. He did not imagine her returning. Instead, he lived with the truth that their paths had crossed in a moment when both their souls needed one another. She needed space to breathe. He needed to offer care. Their connection was complete, even though it did not stay. Years later, when Daniel walked through the settlement, someone might see him pause to look at the horizon, his eyes soft with quiet memory. Someone might see him hold the pendant for a brief moment before placing it back in the wooden box. Someone might hear him speak gently to someone who was hurting, offering the same quiet patience that once helped another soul rest. He never told the story in full, not because it was painful, but because some stories are meant to be lived rather than retold. The truth was this: He had saved a woman not only from physical exhaustion, but from the exhaustion that happens deep within the spirit, and she in return had reminded him that even the smallest act of care can change the direction of a life. She had stayed not because she loved him, but because she needed a place where her heart could find stillness. She left when she found the strength to walk forward again. Daniel did not lose anything when she left. He gained understanding. Sometimes love does not look like holding on. Sometimes love looks like offering gentle space when the world has been too heavy. Sometimes the strongest care is the kind that asks for nothing in return. Daniel learned that love lived in presence, not in possession. In giving, not in keeping. So when the wind moved softly through the settlement in the evenings, and the sky turned the color of quiet embers, Daniel felt no sadness. He simply felt grateful. Grateful for the meeting. Grateful for the journey shared. Grateful that a single act of kindness could touch two lives in a way that would last. Even when the paths had separated, and the desert continued, wide and endless and full of silent stories, waiting to connect the next two souls who needed to find each other.